Regarding his publication of his enemies list, Mr. Patel proclaimed, "The manhunt starts tomorrow," and reposted a video depicting him taking a chainsaw to his political enemies. Is that you, Kash Patel, reposting that at the top of that page?
Senator, I had nothing to do with the creation of that meme.
Is that you reposting it, was my question.
And that's me at the top.
You said FBI agents were responsible for the violence on January 6th, and I quote you here, "beyond a reasonable doubt." Is that what you said?
That's completely incorrect, and I appreciate the opportunity to address that.
I'll give you an opportunity in writing, but this is my time now.
Have at it.
An Inspector Attorney General investigation found that that was false. And you said we should impeach judges who rule against Donald Trump, who are, in your words, political terrorists.
What you're about to hear isn't political theater. It's a direct warning about what happens when the rule of law is replaced by fear. In this exchange, Representative Julie Johnson confronts Kristi Noem with a simple but devastating truth. Enforcing the law without probable cause and due process isn't security.
Thanks, Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Patel. I remember January 6th. Colleagues running through our halls to flee the mob, colleagues shouting that rioters should be shot, us returning to our constitutional business through hallways cleared for us by automatic weapons carrying SWAT teams. None of you, none of us, said those violent rioters should be pardoned. A Republican colleague said such pardons would be hard to believe, even absurd. Your former colleague J.D. Vance said the violent rioters should not be pardoned. Even Jim Jordan said pardons would, and I quote, "focus on all the people who didn't commit any violence." Well, Trump pardoned all of them. And there's a lesson in that. Every time you think Trump would never go that far, rethink that. We all seem to agree that violence against police is unacceptable, yet more than 600 people who physically attacked Capitol Police officers were just put back on the street, part of a 1,500-person personal Trump army, now out there with people who have proven themselves willing to do violence on Trump's call. In only 10 days, some are already back committing crimes. We've also tried as a committee, together, to address the dangers of illicit drug sales over the internet, and I assume we're all against murder for hire. But Trump also just pardoned a dark web operator sentenced to life in prison for trafficking illegal drugs online and accused of soliciting murders for hire. Those pardons, as Mr. Patel has said, are a mistake, but they are also a signal that we are entering a strange and dangerous time. That is the context for today's hearing. Warnings that the FBI could become Trump's enforcer, use the powers of law enforcement to stifle speech and dissent, punish political rivals of either party, and hand out free passes, get out of jail free cards to violent supporters are warnings we should heed. Here are some warnings of this nominee's Trump administration colleagues. Former Attorney General Bill Barr said, "This nominee has virtually no experience that would qualify him to serve at the highest level of the world's preeminent law enforcement agency," end quote, "and we would never be able to command the respect necessary to run the day-to-day operations of the Bureau." That's for the deputy position. Former CIA Director Gina Haspel was reported threatening to resign rather than have this nominee serve under her. John Bolton, Trump's former national security advisor, said, "I didn't think he was qualified. I was forced to hire him." Trump's deputy national security advisor, the nominee's former supervisor, said, "His ideas are ludicrous. He's absolutely unqualified for this job. He's untrustworthy. And it's an absolute disgrace to even consider an individual of this nature." That's from Republican appointees who worked with him. And here's what this nominee himself has said about using his office to prosecute journalists. "We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. We're going to come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly." that a correct quotation, Mr. Patel?
Senator, that's a partial quotation,
But it's correct.
in part.
Regarding his publication of his enemies list, Mr. Patel proclaimed, "The manhunt starts tomorrow," and reposted a video depicting him taking a chainsaw to his political enemies. Is that you, Kash Patel, reposting that at the top of that page?
Senator, I have nothing to do with the creation of that
Is that
meme,
you reposting it, was my question.
and that's me at the top.
You said FBI agents were responsible for the violence on January 6th, and I quote you here, "beyond a reasonable doubt." Is that what you said?
That's completely incorrect, and I appreciate the opportunity to address that.
I'll give you an opportunity in writing, but this is my time now.
Have at it.
An Inspector Attorney General investigation found that that was false. And you said we should impeach judges who rule against Donald Trump, who are, in your words, political terrorists. When this nominee tries to explain all this away, keep one thing in mind. He's testified under oath before a Colorado judge who presided over a Trump case in which he was a witness, and the judge found, and I'm quoting here, he was not a credible witness. His testimony is not only illogical, but completely devoid of any evidence in the record. That's from a judge. This is a dangerous time, and I ask all my colleagues to consider whether these plain comments by this person and by his own Trump administration colleagues should be given a blind eye, just overlooked, or whether, like the warnings of pardoning violent January 6 offenders, they're warnings to be heeded. There is an unfathomable difference between a seeming facade being constructed around this nominee here today and what he has actually done and said in real life when left to his own devices. Conduct shows character. And if you look at history, you see the danger of security chiefs in authoritarian regimes becoming the tools of political power. The characteristics that they often show are that they are vengeful, that they are grandiose, that they are intemperate, that they are partisan and blindly loyal, and that they are servile and won't say no. I'm afraid that the history of this nominee's conduct raises those warnings. And I yield my 1 second back.
Julie Johnson directly confronts DHS Secretary Kristi Noem over what Johnson describes as systemic abuses by immigration enforcement agencies and a fundamental breakdown of the rule of law. Rather than framing the issue as a partisan or ideological disagreement, Johnson grounds her argument in constitutional principles, legal standards, and first-hand observations, arguing that current enforcement practices are actively violating due process and civil rights. Johnson begins by addressing what she sees as an escalating climate of fear across the country. She explains that this fear is not limited to undocumented immigrants, but extends to lawful residents, American citizens, and even law enforcement officers themselves. According to Johnson, this atmosphere is driven by rhetoric coming from the highest levels of government and filtering downward into enforcement behavior. She warns that such fear is dangerous because it erodes trust, destabilizes communities, and increases tension between the public and law enforcement. At the center of Johnson's critique is Secretary Noem's claim that DHS is restoring the rule of law. Johnson flatly rejects this assertion and explains that the rule of law rests on two core pillars, probable cause and due process. She argues that neither is being consistently respected. Johnson states that individuals are being detained or arrested based solely on appearance, particularly skin color, without any individualized suspicion or evidence of wrongdoing. She emphasizes that this practice is incompatible with constitutional standards and cannot be justified under any legitimate interpretation of lawful enforcement. Johnson further explains that due process, the right to a fair hearing and legal protections before being deprived of liberty, is being routinely denied. She describes cases in which individuals are detained for days without hearings, access to legal review, or meaningful opportunities to challenge their detention. According to Johnson, these practices represent a severe departure from constitutional norms and threaten the legal protections that apply to everyone in the country, not just immigrants. To support her claims, Johnson cites her visit to an ICE detention facility outside Dallas. There, she observed that more than 70% of detainees were classified at the lowest threat level and had no criminal history whatsoever. This directly contradicts repeated claims by the administration that enforcement efforts are narrowly focused on serious criminals or national security threats. Johnson argues that these findings expose a gap between official rhetoric and operational reality. The script also highlights the human consequences of these policies. Johnson recounts multiple incidents in which American citizens were detained by ICE despite clearly identifying themselves as U.S. citizens. Some were allegedly assaulted, suffering broken ribs, brain injuries, and other physical harm. In one case, an elderly man was reportedly knocked to the ground after asserting his citizenship, only to be detained anyway. Johnson stresses that such actions represent an alarming disregard for both civil rights and basic human dignity. While Johnson acknowledges that many ICE and Border Patrol agents perform their duties professionally and lawfully, she draws attention to the existence of bad actors who exceed their authority. She argues that leadership has failed to adequately discipline or rein in these individuals. According to Johnson, the lack of accountability sends a dangerous message that misconduct will be tolerated or ignored, further eroding public trust. A recurring theme throughout the script is oversight. Johnson emphasizes that congressional concerns have been raised repeatedly through hearings and formal letters, many of which have gone unanswered. She frames this lack of response as an institutional failure that allows abuses to persist unchecked. Johnson argues that oversight is not anti-law enforcement, rather, it is essential to maintaining legitimacy, professionalism, and public confidence in policing institutions. The analysis portion of the script underscores why this moment matters beyond immigration policy. It explains that when probable cause and due process are treated as optional, enforcement shifts from lawful action to arbitrary power. Arrests become seizures, and security becomes intimidation. The script warns that constitutional erosion rarely happens all at once. Instead, it occurs gradually through normalized exceptions, unanswered complaints, and unchecked authority.